الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقول الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس. ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فانتهى فله ما سلف وأمره إلى الله ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. يمحق الله الربا ويربي الصدقات والله لا يحب كل كفار أثيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا إن كنتم مؤمنين. فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله. فإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. صدق الله العظيم. الفاتحة.
Al-Fatiha, the opening. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Praise be to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the world, most gracious, most merciful, master of the day of judgment. You do we worship, and your aid we seek. Show us the straight way, the way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, whose portion is not wrath, and who go not astray. Baqarah 275. Those who devour usury will not stand except as stands one whom the evil one by his touch has driven to madness. That's because they say trade is like usury. But Allah has permitted trade and forbidden usury. Those who after receiving direction from their Lord desist shall be pardoned for the past. Their case is for Allah to judge. But those who repeat the offense are companions of the fire. They will abide therein forever. Allah will deprive usury of all growth, but will give increase for deeds of charity. For He loves not creatures ungrateful and wicked. O you who believe, fear Allah and give up what remains of your demand for usury, if you are indeed believers. If you do it not, take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger, but if you turn back, you shall have your capital sums. Deal not unjustly, and you shall not be dealt with unjustly. Al-Imran 130. O you who believe, devour not usury, double and multiply, but fear Allah that He may really prosper. Allah says.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Mike Abdullahi. For those that don't know me, I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. I'm the president of American Finance House, LARIBA. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here. I would like to take a moment, first of all, to thank our Sheikh, Ahmed Karamateh from Masjid Umar ibn Khattab. He has a beautiful voice, and his son, mashallah, who also did the adhan. If you heard the adhan, he did the adhan. Mashallah, blessed family. Thank you very much. I welcome you to LARIBA 2000 Symposium. We were running a little late. Unfortunately, we had some last-minute adjustments that needed to be done. I appreciate your patience and bearing with us. What I'd like to do before we get started, I'd like to update everybody on Dr. Rahman. Many of you have looked at the program and noticed that he's supposed to be here. He is doing well, alhamdulillah. For those that didn't know, he had two actually major operations. He was in the hospital for the better part of 2 or 3 weeks, and alhamdulillah, he was out last Friday. He is recuperating. He plans on being here today. He had thought he'd be in earlier, but given the length of our program that goes all the way until probably 8, 9 o'clock, he felt it'd be better if he came about 4:30 to catch the end of this program and then the beginning of the next program. That way he's able to catch both and see as many people as possible. So alhamdulillah, I just want to let everybody know that he is feeling well. Inshallah, we will see him later. We have assembled a distinguished panel of speakers for you. The first session and the second session, inshallah, which will begin after Asr prayers. You have your copies of the program. I'd like to go through and just mention to you a highlight of the people that are speaking, and we'll introduce them to you, and worth knowing. Under the symposium program, our first speaker actually was scheduled to be Professor Najatullah Siddiq. Unfortunately, he had to withdraw at the very last moment. He had another function a couple of days ago and was unable to make it out in time. So graciously, on his behalf and on a very last-minute notice, Mr. Iqbal Khan has agreed to step in and carry the theme that Dr. Najatullah Siddiqui was to carry, which is the history of Islamic finance. Mr. Abad is also, you will recognize his name. He's one of our awardees, and we'll tell you a lot more about him later on tonight. But he's a managing director of Aman Funds, an HSBC company. He comes all the way from London, England to join us, participate in this program, and graciously accept the award we'd like to bestow on him a little later. So following Mr. Abad, we will have Professor Bill Moore sitting at the end. Professor Bill Moore will give us a brief introduction on his experience. He teaches at UC Irvine, and his interests lie into law and culture and how they interact, and the pursuit of alternatives financing. So he will help us with that. Following him will be a very distinguished speaker, and actually the second gentleman to be honored tonight, Mr. Thomas Mullins. Mr. Mullins is the Executive Director of the Harvard Islamic Information Program. He comes from Harvard University, where he's involved in many programs, and I'm just touching a little bit on the overview, but he'll tell you a little more about, we'll introduce more about him a bit later. And lastly, for the first session is going to be Professor Mahmoud Al-Yamat. Professor Mahmoud will give us some information on the economic history of LARIBA banking and finance. Okay. This is the first session. The second session, let me introduce Dr. Saleh Malaika also, Islamic Investment Development. He will be our moderator for the first speech. Mr. Abad will speak. In the second session, Dr. Saleh Malaika will be the speaker. He's going to be discussing emerging industry of Islamic and socially responsible financing. Following him, myself and Mr. Gary Findley will give you an idea, a vision that we have at American Finance House, LARIBA, about introducing a LARIBA window that would provide LARIBA financing in traditional banks, similar to other forms of other services that you see in any bank, an insurance window or an investments window, something of that sort. And then our keynote speaker in the second session will be Mr. Iqbal Khan, and he will tell us about his experiences in dealing with regulators in the West, primarily in the UK and the USA, about establishing Islamic financing entities. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Dr. Saleh Malaika. He will be the moderator, and we'll go in the order of the program, starting with Mr. Abad. Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I would like in turn to welcome you to this annual LARIBA convention, which happens to be my second time to attend. It's indeed a very good event, getting the experts in the field. I would like to introduce the first speaker, which is supposed to be Professor Najatullah Siddiqui, but for some reason he couldn't make it, and Brother Iqbal Khan will be filling in his place. He told me that he was informed to fill for him only a few minutes ago, so he got a tough job, and he asked me if I could cover some part of it, so I will give him the words first, and then if if there's anything I feel that should be covered, I may add it. So, if you allow me to introduce Mr. Iqbal Khan, has been a very well-known figure in the Islamic banking. He held key positions with the DMI group, Darul an Islamic group, which is a Geneva-based group but has operations in many countries, especially in the Gulf. He's been responsible as a managing director and global head of Amman for the HSBC Bank group. He's been an active member for the Consultative Committee for Islamic and Investment Export Cooperation. It's a subsidiary of the Islamic Development Bank and has been an operating board, a member of the operating board of the Harvard Islamic Finance Information Program at Harvard University. So I give him to start the speech.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين أما بعد. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is not every day that you get an opportunity to fill in your professor. Though at a very short notice, I feel uniquely privileged to stand in with great humility for Dr. Nasruddin, who taught me in the early 70s at the Legal Muslim University. That was a time when to talk about Islamic banking and finance, even in Muslim society today, was a major challenge. I remember in the university days, if you either were a confirmed Marxist or you were a total rebel, there were very few people who were talking in the early 70s about Islamic finance. And Dr. Siddiqui was holding the banner for Islamic finance. I do not have the privilege of having a copy of his speech, so the remarks I'm going to make perhaps more from my memory, and also to give you a feel for a sense of history of Islamic finance. Islamic finance has come a long way from being a concept in the early 70s to where it is now a vibrant, dynamic industry spread across the Islamic world. Many of you would recall in the early 1980s an article which appeared in the Euromoney. Headline article a couple of pages which said, Quran in one hand and calculator in the other. What is Islamic banking all about? Very skeptical. Well, the skeptics have been confounded and Islamic finance is here to stay. This industry today stands at around $120 billion, spread across 46 countries, growing at 15 to 20% per annum. As a banker, when you look around, you see there are 2 or 3 areas which are growth industry in the banking sector: corporate finance, capital markets, and Islamic finance. What drives the growth of Islamic finance are beliefs, values. As Muslims grow and evolve and gain more economic independence, there is a desire to go back to their roots, to their heritage, to the foundations of Islamic finance. In my own institution where I work, HSBC Group, we had our first client about 100 years ago. 2 years ago, when we formed our Islamic finance division, and later on converted into Command Finance, I was visiting Hong Kong, where our bank had its origins. Now we are headquartered in London. And I called on a client, and he said, "My God, you bankers take a long time to respond to clients' requests. It has taken you almost 100 years to respond to our requests." And this client told me that his great-great-grandfather came from Yemen, went to India, went to Hong Kong, established a trading company, and wrote in his will and a letter to the bank saying that if my descendants do not follow the principles of Islamic finance, and his wordings were that I'm a Muslim, I don't give interest, I don't take interest. All my dealings are according to Muhammadan law. In those days, 100 years ago, Muslims were predominantly known in the English language as Mohammedans, like Christians are known as followers of Christ. So he said, if all my dealings will be conducted according to Muhammadan law, and if my future generations do not follow that, the bank is authorized to disinherit them. The bank said, well, you can't do this. To do that, you have to change the articles and memorandums of association. And I think in the modern form, the first modern trading company, the Sharia-compliant organization structure was perhaps established there. The roots of Islamic finance are deep embedded across the Islamic world. And you see that in modern form, Islamic finance started with the creation of a range of Islamic institutions, including the Islamic Development Bank, which was created by the Organization of Islamic Countries Charter, an organization which brings together all the Muslim countries, pioneering Islamic financial institutions like LARIBA Group, Dr. Salim Malaika represents as the CEO, the Al Islamic Group, the Dubai Islamic Bank, Kuwait Finance House in Kuwait, Al Rajhi in Saudi Arabia. A number of institutions have come across. Islamic finance has also traveled from the Middle East to the Gulf to other parts of the world. Wherever there are predominantly Muslim populations, you find Islamic finance expanding into those areas. Malaysia has become an important home for Islamic finance. And what drives the growth of these institutions which are spread across so many countries? And what is the process? We find that first and foremost Islamic finance gets studied as a concept. I was in Singapore last year, and the Singapore Investment Agency had a task force studying Islamic finance. And I was invited to go and meet them, and I thought that this would be a half-an-hour meeting with 2 or 3 executives at most. And I went into a boardroom filled with capacity audience. And I said, what is this all about? They said, well, this is about value added. Singapore lives and thrives on value added. All around us are large economies, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei. We do not want to lose out. We have a strong Muslim community. We want them to be part of the mainstream solution. So you find in countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, many other countries where Islamic finance is being studied as a concept. You move across and you find countries where Islamic finance, the initial seeds are being planted. Your city or state as an example. That some pioneering individuals get together and they create a concept and they put their money, their faith, their hope into a concept, try to make it into a reality. So you find the emergence of Islamic financial institutions at the second phase. And then third phase is that you have some non-banking Islamic financial institutions emerging as well, like the Kafir. We had a very interesting conference a few days ago in New York, in which we saw how far the Kafir or Islamic insurance has come as an industry. Then the next phase is when you have mutual funds coming in, where you have the beginnings and hallmarks of capital markets, where the possibilities of the secondary markets are being explored. In these are countries like Malaysia, Bahrain, and a range of other countries as well. So we see today that Islamic finance is definitely here to stay. It is playing an important role in increasing the embedded capital of Muslim countries. The Islamic Development Bank is playing a leadership role in this regard. Last year we saw the launch of the $1.5 billion Islamic Development Bank Infrastructure Fund, which is targeted at increasing the embedded capital of Muslim countries. We also see a second generation of Islamic financial institutions coming. Merchant banking, investment banking institutions, like International Investor in Kuwait. Many others, large institutions like Citibank are creating standalone subsidiaries to address the need of their Muslim clients. Citibank has a subsidiary called City Islamic Investment Bank. These second generation institutions are bringing in a sense of innovation, a sense of urgency to the industry, and therefore assisting in taking the industry to the next stage of its evolution. We also see that the regulators are taking a keen interest in this growth industry, because they clearly want to see how the ethical indigenous concept impact the broader economy. Do they have any mainstream relevance to large economies of the world? The Muslim countries are responding by making sure that they are able to codify their accounting regulations, their principles and policies through a framework. So an organization has been set up in Bahrain called the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. This includes all the large Islamic financial institutions across the world. It includes the Islamic Development Bank. It also includes most of the central bank. What they are trying to do is to see where Islamic finance fits in terms of international accounting standards and also in terms of the regulatory framework. That is clearly creating a framework which is allowing international regulators to understand Islamic finance much better. Programs like Harvard Islamic Information Finance Program, which Tom Mullins helped to co-found, are making sure that reliable, accurate data is available on this growth industry. If we do not have reliable, accurate, transparent data, then it takes longer for the industry to mature and reach across. So programs like that are playing a very pioneering role. We also find that the Sharia scholars across the world are reaching out to each other. There is a greater consensus today than it was 10 years ago or earlier than that. In Malaysia, you see a model of Sharia governance where there is one central supervisory Sharia board. In the Middle East, it is much more flexible, much more free market approach. But at the same time, under the umbrella of AOFI, the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, you find that there is a consensus building on the major Sharia issues pertinent to Islamic finance. What that is doing is that it is bringing the Islamic institutions on common standards. Once we have common standards, we have the ability to transact with each other, to deal with each other, and perhaps take us to the creation of secondary markets and interbank markets for the Islamic financial institutions. Have we arrived? No, we haven't. We have a long journey to undertake, and there are major serious challenges which face Islamic finance. I will list a few of them, and I'm sure that the speakers today will talk about the rest. The first challenge which the industry faces, both in the Islamic world and in the Western world, is the absence of an enabling macroeconomic legal framework. Islamic finance has evolved as a free market force all across the Islamic world, and therefore had to fit in to an existing framework which was designed for the conventional instruments. So none of the Muslim countries had a framework where the data or the leasing transaction or the murabaha or the musharaka could be transacted, because there were a range of regulations right from companies law to central bank supervisory regulations to capital adequacy regulations, which were created for the conventional financial instruments. They did not acknowledge or create the climate for Islamic financial instruments. Let me give you an example. If you today wanted to do a genuine cross-border idara to Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, or any of the Muslim countries, you would have to do it through exceptions, because the framework as it exists today makes an idara transaction very expensive, because the fiscal regime, the stamp duty, the withholding taxes are all created for conventional financial instruments. So Islamic finance had to adjust to an existing macroeconomic legal framework. Now efforts are being made at various levels in various countries to come up with a framework which will allow this industry to move from being run by exceptions, because you can't build an industry on exceptions. These efforts are at various stages in various countries. That is first a major challenge in my opinion, which faces Islamic finance today. The second challenge is the challenge of people. I think everybody says this in a proverbial sense, that people are the most important assets. But this is more true about the new industry. The ability to attract and retain talented people in mainstream Islamic finance is very important. How do you do that? You give them economic ownership, you give them psychic ownership, you make them a part of your institutions. We need to have a culture of partnership of professionals in Islamic financial institutions so that they can attract and retain the best. There needs to be more effort to attract the younger generation, and in this regard, the bigger universities in the West are playing a very important role. These universities are becoming an important source of talent for the Islamic finance industry. The industry also has to rise to the challenge in order to accommodate the aspirations of all these young people who want to be a part of the Islamic finance industry. Last year, we hosted a careers fair on Islamic finance in London. And this was the first time a careers fair was dedicated and targeted at Islamic financial community. Students wanted to aspire to get jobs in Islamic financial institutions. So the IDB took around 10 of those present in their Young Professionals program. We find that there is a great deal of enthusiasm about these students, but they need training centers where they could be groomed, and a culture which is very important, which is linked to people, can be created within these institutions. Because at the end of the day, a culture based on our indigenous ethical values is the one which is going to give us the inner strength to bring in change, to take us to the next stage of our evolution. The third challenge is the challenge of mainstream relevance. We cannot be an industry which is just working on niche products and niche communities. We have to have the mainstream of people, the larger and broader community. The fourth challenge is how do we build critical mass in this industry. You see all across very large institutions competing and finding it difficult to get shelf space in the international markets. Islamic finance industry today is still quite fragmented, as is the case with any newly emerging industries. We are seeing the beginnings of some form of consolidation within the industry. But size and critical mass is quite important in terms of having funds under management, capital, products, people, and above all, legality and earning power are very important. Critical mass to me has always meant the ability to go out into the markets and bid for any business of any size across the Islamic world. When I look at the future, I see tremendous challenges, but I see also opportunities. More and more of the institutional market is opening up Islamic finance. So far, the industry had grown on the back of retail, high net worth individuals committing themselves to Islamic finance. We are now seeing the institutional market, the pension fund, the endowment funds being driven by their retail constituencies to move towards this growth industry. I feel that as we move forward, there is a strong need for institutions to work together and to create the critical mass in order to make sure that Islamic finance not only increases the embedded capital of Muslim countries, but also provides mainstream relevance. Mainstream relevance in the Western context, in England or America, is primarily talking about community banking, ethical investments, indigenous form of financing. Islam has always been an inclusive religion, and therefore we should make sure that this form of financing is open to Muslims as well as non-Muslims. When I was in Darul, I had a very interesting incident. Mr. Chairman, I just closed to that remark. My country manager in Turkey used to report to me, called me and said, "Sir, we have a problem. We have some clients who want to deposit money." I said, "Well, so what is the problem?" He said, "Sir, one of them is the chief rabbi of Islam, and he has got about 6 or 7 other Jewish businessmen." So I said, "What is the problem?" He said, "What do I do with their money?" I said, "For God's sake, take it. For centuries, We have been putting our money with them. And for the first time, they have come to our doorsteps. And you are calling me and telling me, should I take the money or not? That is what reaching out to communities means. Why did they come to us? Why do Coptic Christian Bank of First Islamic Bank of Egypt? It is because they can relate to the value system of Islamic finance. And with those words, I thank you very much. I'm sure I'm not done justice to what Dr. Siddiqui would have said, but I've tried to give you a perspective of where we are with the Islamic finance industry. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Brother Abbas. I think you've done a superb job. If you will notice, I can see why you're being an awardee tonight. I'd like to just add a few words. Not that he didn't do a great job. I think he did a great job covering all aspects. But you have mentioned the accounting and auditing organization for some financial institutions. And recently, that is like 6-8 months ago, they have formed a Sharia Council at IOFI level. This Sharia Council is made up of 10 prominent Islamic scholars, and in an attempt to put the Sharia fatwas in a, I would say a standard form, but in a form that is homogeneous, agreed upon by the consensus of that Sharia Council. And that would give the Islamic banking and finance movement a lot of credibility, because the movement has been criticized that different financial institutions in the Islamic banking community have been adopting different standards. So with this council at the center setting standards, it's going to be a good move. IOFI has introduced so far 23 different auditing and accounting standards. The organization has been pushing to adopt these standards in many of the Islamic countries. Bahrain did adopt them, Sudan as well. Kuwait is expected to join soon, in Malaysia. So they have a program to promote the adoption of these standards at the central bank level. Bahrain has been promoting the Islamic banking in a very strong way, and it is home to at least 18 Islamic banks. Another area of Islamic banking and finance that is also growing very rapidly is the takaful area. And there was a conference in New York a few days ago. Brother Omar Fisher here is with us. He has organized that conference. The takaful industry is growing tremendously, following the trend of disintegration between insurance and banking. The same thing is happening in Islamic banking. New products are coming to the market, like the family takaful, which is a good substitute for life insurance. Another very important area that is being given attention lately is the Waqf al-Awqaf. As you know, the endowments in Islam has played a very important role in social development, hospitals and schools, mosques, etc. And now there is a comeback to that, and there has been a conference in Mecca 3 months ago on this particular issue, how to get the Waqf more involved in Islamic countries. The other area I would like to talk about is the technology. Technology is bringing efficiency to the financial institutions. It's making the access for the conventional banking very efficient to new markets. Islamic banks are taking advantage of that also. And I think they will tend to benefit even more from that movement in technology because they are small, they are fragmented and dispersed, so the technology will allow them to reach markets much more efficiently than before. The globalization also has been a very important aspect in the development of Islamic banking because globalization means breaking the barriers that most Islamic countries have in terms of foreign currency exchange, foreign investment, in terms of disclosure, transparency, etc. So these markets are opening up and exposing a very encouraging opportunity for the Islamic banks to expand. In fact, we think at Al-Baraka that it's a good opportunity to export the Islamic banking concepts and values to many countries, including countries where there are Islamic Muslim minorities. I just wanted to add these few words, but I think the subject has been well covered, and we will entertain your questions, inshallah, at the end of the session. Now allow me to present our second speaker, Professor Bill Morrow. Professor Morrow is Professor of Anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. He was trained in the field of legal anthropology. This is a new field to me, maybe you can enlighten us what it means. And has conducted extensive research on the effects of law and legal practice on cultural formations. He has particular interest in the relationship between law and money, as well as the challenges posed by alternative financial arrangements, such as those represented under the Islamic banking. Professor Morrow has studied Islamic banking and finance in Manette through the Cyber Institute of Banking and Finance. So he will be happy to share his experience.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Yahya Abdul Rahman and Mr. Mike Abdelati for their gracious invitation to prepare these remarks and to participate in this forum with such esteemed colleagues. This is the third LARIBA symposium I've attended here in Pasadena, and it's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here among you again today. First, some introductions. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of California at Irvine in Orange County, where I've been teaching since 1996. My research interests lie in the cosmological underpinnings of law and economics. I was trained in the field of legal anthropology and have conducted research on the myriad effects of law and legal practice on cultural formations, as well as the cultural influences on law. I'm interested in particular in what contemporary finance can tell us about contemporary society. For example, contemporary conventional riba-based finance is usually presented in universities as secular. I'm interested, however, in how that secularism assumes a certain worldview, and how secularism itself is a moral position that sometimes, but not always, has specifically Christian assumptions built into it. Islam, as a transcultural religion, offers a parallel and alternative worldview to that of secular finance because it recognizes the moral and religious assumptions in economics. I find that in my teaching, my Muslim students are quick to grasp this point, while other students, more often than not, miss it. In short, I try to use my research and my teaching at UCI to question people's deeply held beliefs about the nature of law and economic processes, namely, the assumption in the West that those are always secular affairs. As an anthropologist, the bulk of my teaching is devoted to helping students become aware of the importance of different worldviews. As many of you know, anthropology traditionally concerned itself with exotic, faraway peoples, often deemed primitive, and sought to paint a portrait of those peoples so that an educated Christian Western public would come away with an understanding and appreciation of their difference. The impact of colonialism, as well as the global spread of capitalism and the nation-state form of political organization, radically transformed the societies anthropologists used to study, and in the process, transformed the discipline of anthropology as well. While some of us continue to study the small, isolated societies our disciplinary ancestors made their subject matter, we do so with an eye to the relationship between those societies and large-scale social processes. And many of us, like myself, do not study isolated peoples at all, but take modern society in all its diversity as our focus of study. The University of California at Irvine houses a department of anthropology whose faculty are devoted to the study of contemporary society and modern problems. As a faculty, we conduct research on things like immigration and citizenship, development, population policies, law, transnational and global economic and political forces, nationalism, religion, ethnicity, and so on, in regions stretching from Brazil to the Caribbean to Africa, Central Asia, India, China, and closer to home, Southern California. Our particular emphasis on modern society poses several challenges for our teaching. Undergraduates taking Introduction to Anthropology courses expect to hear about bizarre customs and faraway peoples. They often come for the shock value. What we attempt to do is to lead them to turn an anthropological eye toward the way their own worldview is shaped by certain moral assumptions. The goal is to help them to reflect critically on their own preconceptions about the way the world works. Let me tell you a bit about our student body at UCI and about my department's flagship course, Introduction to Sociocultural Anthropology. UC Irvine is one of the fastest growing universities in the University of California system, and indeed in the country. We have about 18,000 undergraduates and expect to have 25,000 in the next 5 to 10 years. In other words, we're in a period of incredible growth. Our students come mainly from Southern California, and we have a large proportion of Asians and Asian Americans, as well as a sizable minority of Muslim students from all ethnic backgrounds. Introduction to Sociocultural Anthropology is one of the largest lecture courses on campus. Each quarter it draws from 300 to 450 students. I've taught the class twice, and each time I have to turn students away because they wouldn't fit in the lecture hall, which holds 400. In the course, I focus on 4 broad themes: science, religion, social inequality, and economics. For each theme, I have the students read texts that illuminate different worldviews, as well as texts that explore dominant Western visions of these themes. So, for example, students read about a small society near Papua New Guinea, which believes in various forms of magic, and uses magic to do many of the things the West uses science to accomplish. Things like growing plentiful food or navigating the Pacific Ocean. Then, the students read a book about a high-energy physics lab in Northern California, written by an anthropologist who explores the relationship between the physicists' science and their religious beliefs. Here, the juxtaposition between a so-called primitive culture and modern science helps the students see the religious and moral assumptions built into their own views about science, and leads them to reflect on the interrelationships between the domains of science and religion, which are interrelationships they rarely have the opportunity to explore. Both times that I've taught this class, I found that by the middle of the quarter, right after they've read the book about the physicists in Northern California, the second and third rows of the lecture hall would slowly but surely be filled in by the Muslim students. I think they're drawn to the mode of presentation because it helps them put their finger on some of the discomfort they often feel in a supposedly secular university environment that is nonetheless often profoundly Christian. Looking at the connections between Christian religious belief and contemporary theories in high-energy physics, for example, leads them to reflect on their own beliefs and articulate them to themselves and their peers without feeling like they have to be on the defensive all the time. I don't mean to suggest that they do feel they have to be on the defensive all the time, or that UCI is a hostile environment. Far from it. There's an active Muslim community there, several very strong student organizations, and a very supportive faculty. Nonetheless, and this comes from my conversations with my students, the Muslim students I have are constantly thinking through the implications of the sometimes contending forces of secular society and faith in every aspect of their daily lives, in ways few other students are compelled to do. Other students, for example, don't find a contradiction between the secular university environment and their Christian faith, because very often that supposed secularism is in fact profoundly structured by Christianity. Think about what sorts of days off people get, for instance, and when professors are accommodating for students for religious holidays and when they're not. That's a great example. As I mentioned, in this course there's a unit on economics. In it, I asked the students to examine the meanings of money, the different ways people use money, not just to buy things, but also, for instance, as an index of luck, so fortune, as in flipping a coin. During my first year of teaching this course, I hadn't thought to introduce anything on Islamic banking or economics at all until I saw the interest of the Muslim students. I was very fortunate to have a couple of students in particular who sent me regular emails and came to my office to discuss the course material and how it could be made more relevant to them. And this is how I came to give my first lecture on Islamic banking and finance. In the past 4 years, I've given versions of this lecture on 4 occasions. Twice in this introductory anthropology class, once in an introductory international studies course, which I also teach, and once as a guest lecturer in a course on Islam and society taught by one of my colleagues. I want to give you the gist of that lecture before detailing the students' responses to it and how I think about those responses. What I do first is to present the students with an account of how a group of Bolivian peasants during the 19th and 20th centuries linked ideas about money to their religious beliefs. The context is the coming of tin mining operations and the incorporation of Bolivian indigenous peoples into both wage labor practices and Catholicism. In a classic anthropological study, an anthropologist described the peasants' beliefs about what they called the baptism of money. Put briefly, and without the richness of that account, these peasants, toiling away day after day for little pay, watched their bosses and the mine owners get richer and richer without ever seeming to work. Upon learning the basics of banking, that the rich put their money in the bank and it grows, so they don't have to work as much as the poor, the peasants conclude that the rich had figured out a way to make money reproduce. The peasants even learned the word for this reproduction: interest. Through what mechanism did the rich induce money, an inanimate object, to give birth to more money, the way an animal gives birth to its young? The peasants concluded that it must be through the intercession of the devil. Hence, a host of beliefs sprung up among these peasants about the rich baptizing their money in the name of the devil in order for it to generate interest. Students' reactions are generally condescending toward the peasants. The students say things like, what a silly thing to believe, how could they possibly think that, they have no understanding of how banking works, they really don't know what they're talking about when it comes to interest, they don't understand Catholicism even, that that's supposed to be their religion, and so on. What I do next, however, after letting them air those views, is I introduce them to the writings of Aristotle and Martin Luther, 2 key figures in the Western tradition, whom no self-respecting undergraduate would ever call a primitive. As you recall, both Aristotle and Luther made the same criticism of interest. Interest seems to make inanimate objects reproduce the way living creatures do, and so is contrary to the natural and divine order. What I do next, and I hope you see this is my roundabout way of introducing Islamic banking and finance that sort of sneaks up on it. What I do next is I show them some slides of some paintings from the Western Christian Renaissance. And I have one. If someone could put the slide projector on and advance it to the first slide. This is one of the slides, the paintings that I use in my course. It's by a Dutch Renaissance painter. It's a painting by a Dutch master called The Banker and His Wife. Made in the 16th century, a time and place of profound religious and economic transformation and strife in Europe. The painting is an allegory about banking and morality. We are inserted into the painting as the banker's client, who has come to have some goods appraised. Notice how the banker and his wife neither look at each other nor at the viewer, at us. All attention is focused on the items of wealth in the painting. Notice, too, how the wife has turned away from her prayer book to look at the wealth items. The painter was conveying his alarm that modern banking would cause three specific changes in society. First, it would render all social relationships a function of money. Hence, the relationship between the client and the banker revolves around the wealth, not each other. They don't greet each other as fellow men, but only in terms of their economic relationship. Second, it would destroy the institution of marriage by making it a financial institution. Something, in some ways, it already was for many elite Europeans at the time, but something which many, like this painter, thought was morally wrong. Third, and finally, it would lead people away from their faith. Hence, we see the wife ignores her daily prayers and instead turns to look at the financial transaction. Turn it off and turn off the lights. In the class in International Studies, I do the same routine with this painting and several others. And then I also have the students read Shakespeare's King Lear, as well as selections from the Holy Quran and the Hadith relating to riba and justice. King Lear was written during the same era as that painting was painted. I teach the play to demonstrate the moral and religious ambiguity surrounding money for Christians during Shakespeare's time. In the play, King Lear asks his daughters to rate their love for him in terms of money. He says, "How much do you love me?" And he wants a monetary answer. "I love you for all the values in the kingdom," or something. The two evil sisters do, but Cordelia, the good sister, refuses to equate love and money, and in return earns her father's wrath. He banishes her, and thus begins the tragedy of the play, where Lear, in turning away from religion, duty, and love, in the end forfeits his kingdom, goes crazy, and dies. The painting and King Lear allow me to develop for my students the theme that contemporary ideas about money also carry moral values. Those values in medieval and Renaissance Europe may differ from the ones people hold today, but the underlying assumption that money is potentially morally suspect still holds. And this point, in turn, allows me to develop for the students a further implication, that cultural ideas about money and morality carry with them assumptions about social justice. And here is where I bring in Islamic banking. In the introductory anthropology course, I don't assign specific readings on Islamic banking. In the international studies course, I post some material on a web page, including some overview articles by people like Muhammad Ali. In both, I read the students' email and web postings from people wondering whether things like accepting stock options as part of a hiring package is permissible in Islam, or whether it's all right to use a credit card to secure a rental car contract if you pay the balance off before any interest is accrued. We then discuss the chief concept that I wish them to take away from the discussion, that in Islam there should be no profit without risk, and that profiting by offloading risk onto others is an injustice. I want them to get this idea that risk and uncertainty are inherent in the universe in which God has placed us, and that it's immoral to offload part of your own personal share of that risk onto somebody else. This then brings us up to current events. And we talk about the moving stock market, speculation, IPOs, and so on, issues with which they have a surprising degree of familiarity. How do they react? I find that they come away with a better understanding of the justice issue than anything else. Bear in mind that they're learning in the context of a course that's attempting to give them a broad background in the social sciences and the humanities, and that's attempting to foster critical thinking and writing skills. I think my courses accomplish these goals. I'm not sure, however, that the majority of students come away with a better understanding of RIBA. Justice is a much easier concept for my students to grasp. RIBA and interest to the students are relatively distant. I think there's a paradox here, however, one I've tried to explore with some of my students in one-on-one and small group conversations. Although credit and debt are abstract concepts for undergraduates and seem distant from their everyday lives, nearly all of my students have credit cards, car loans, or student loans. Furthermore, nearly all have made use of web-based e-commerce, almost a necessity. And bear in mind, too, that for the current generation of students, there has only ever been a booming stock market. The current historical moment of speculation and financial globalization is the only context they have ever known. Partially as a result of this, most of my students think of interest as a fee and can't get their minds around the way an interest rate works, much less how interest compounds, much less the moral and ethical issues involved. Social justice, however, is another story. Many students are deeply involved in campus politics and try to stay informed on national and global political issues. The Muslim students at UC Irvine are known for being politically involved, so much so that non-Muslim students of mine have started writing for the Muslim students' newspaper because, as one of my best students told me, that's the only place where they really get into the issues. Conveying the idea that interest contains an element of injustice works, pedagogically speaking, in trying to teach to these kids, while the finer points don't and get lost. It's also extremely difficult to lead students to an appreciation of alternative forms of banking and finance. The ones who care to learn will easily grasp how things like musharaka can be used to devise fair financing and provide returns to investors at the same time. These are the deeply intellectual, serious students, however, and for them, the project is just as much utopian as political and religious. I'm encouraged by the fact that their overall attitude is not one of despair or apathy. They do not say things like, well, how are we going to change anything? We're not going to make a dent in the way the economy works, so why not just join in? They do, however, spend time thinking about the possibility of social and economic justice in their lifetimes, and the place of Islam in creating that social and economic justice. The idea that credit is a human right, for instance, profoundly moves those students who take the time to digest the material I present to them and think about the way it impacts their lives. To conclude, allow me to borrow from the title of this year's LARIBA Symposium, Islamic Banking in the Mainstream, and offer a reflection on why I think I must teach about Islamic banking in the mainstream. Ruth Benedict, one of the founding figures in American anthropology, remarked in 1934 that the West's blindness to the moral embeddedness of its own sciences would lead scholars to make unfounded grand claims about the big questions of human existence. She wrote, quote, "When a student has assembled the vast data for a study of international credits or the process of learning, it is in and through this body of data that the economist or psychologist operates. He does not reckon with the fact of other social arrangements, where all the factors it may be are differently arranged. He identifies the local Western Christian attitudes of the 1930s with human nature, the description of them with economics or psychology." Unquote. Bringing Islamic banking and finance into the mainstream means, among other things, showing how conventional banking, like Benedict's economics and psychology in the 30s, sometimes proceed from very local, culturally and religiously specific attitudes. Like Benedict, I use my teaching to encourage students to give serious consideration to the moral assumptions of the supposedly secular social forms of the West, especially as those forms have spread around the world and have been taken up, often resisted, and transformed. The ultimate goal is to demonstrate that conventional RIBA banking and finance are above all domains that encode whole worldviews, carry moral and religious assumptions, and shape and structure the worlds we inhabit. My hope is that by showing the students this, and presenting Islam's vision of social justice and LARIBA finance, my students, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, can begin to think about how they might transform those worlds. For it is only in this kind of transformation that we will approach a more just future. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Moore, for a very enlightening presentation. It's definitely exciting to hear about other cultures and their perspective on ethics and economics. I would like to add a few things on Islamic banking in terms of ethics. First of all, in Islam, the zakat system, which is very unique to this religion, is a very important concept of social justice. And I don't know if you have spent time in terms of studying, how it works and the implications. But it's basically payment from the rich goes to the poor in specified quantities according to the type of the asset. And it has worked very well in certain areas historically, where it has, counterbalanced the differences between the poor and the rich. The monopoly in Islam has been prohibited 1400 years ago. And it is something that now we hear about antitrust laws and so on. It is something that is worthwhile to study and see how it was prohibited at the time. The issue of central markets and disclosure and so on is also available in Islam 1400 years ago, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, migrated to Medina. The first thing he did, he established a central market, and he prohibited all the traders from cutting deals and transactions before only goods come to the central market, disclosure and transparency, etc. The issue of the insurance that I spoke about earlier with the capital is based on cooperative cooperation between the individuals and covering each other and making sure that there is equity in terms of the distribution of the results of that cooperation. So there are many more concepts. I just wanted to cite a few which I think would be interesting from your field perspective. Allow me to present our next speaker, Mr. Thomas Mullins. Mr. Mullins is the Executive Director of the Islamic Finance Information Program at Harvard University. This program has brought a lot of attention and credibility to the Islamic banking and finance. Mr. Mullins also is the Associate Director for the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, as well as the Executive Director of the program I just mentioned, and the Contemporary Arab Studies program. He has many years of distinguished local and international experience in the fields of petroleum, business consulting, and education. Please welcome Mr. Mullins.
Thank you, Dr. Salah, and particularly thanks to Dr. Yahya and my Nadi for making this day possible for us all. The United States, in an earlier era, frontiers meant the opposite of what they signified to the rest of the world. Here they meant something open, not closed. Americans weren't stopped by our frontiers, we were beckoned onward. The Western frontier was like tomorrow. No matter when you arrived at it, it had already moved on further. LARIBA, Islamic banking and finance, represents a rapidly emerging market on this great American frontier. I believe it has a future as promising here as anywhere else on earth. There are three good reasons that I see favoring this development. Firstly is the growing Islamic community in America. Second, the technological revolution, which resulted in what I call death of distance. And thirdly, the overall social, commercial, and political environment in this country today. Let's just take a quick look at Islam in America. Muslim presence in this country has been conclusively traced at least back to the early 1500s, when the Spanish imported sailors from the Maghreb and Levant to work on their ships. Some say they were even earlier arrivals. Today, the Islamic community in the United States is composed of diverse individuals from a wide range of backgrounds. Some of the numbers I've seen suggest that between 6 and 7 million of the world's almost 2 billion Muslims live in this country, and the numbers are growing rapidly. African Americans represent almost 45% of this community. Asian Americans over 25%. Arab Americans 15%, and Iranian, Turkish, and European Americans are each somewhere between 4 and 6%. Muslims in America are a kaleidoscopic mix of ethnicities. Recent immigrants from Kosovo and Somalia literally rub shoulders in the prayer lines, and second-generation Pakistani Americans, converts of every complexion, Palestinians, Kurds, Chinese, and others from every corner of the globe. Until quite recently, most lived in well-defined Islamic communities. Today, however, Muslims are moving into the mainstream of American life. Like so many minorities before them, are faced with challenges to the practice and traditions of their faith, as well as the opportunities that come with an active and very positive participation in the national civil as well as commercial society. Providing ready access to Islamically correct financial services can be a powerful means to meet the growing need of bonding these many strands of the faithful into a common area of Islamic life. Reaching out to this diverse market is undoubtedly a great challenge. Given the very nature of America's open society, the technological innovations that surround our everyday lives, it should be possible to bind this rapidly growing and increasingly prosperous community to Islamic financial services through structures such as suggested by the DREAM, the final chapter in the LARIBA book, of local, interstate, national, and the worldwide network of LARIBA institutions. Secondly, how will the death of distance shape the future? And what does that mean for Islamic financial services in the United States? Location will no longer be key to most business decisions. Financial service companies can locate any screen-based activity anywhere on Earth, wherever they can find the best bargain, skills, and productivity. Smaller institutions will be able to offer services that, in the past, only giants had scale and scope to provide. Individuals or institutions with valuable ideas, initiatives, strong business plans will attract global venture capital, convert their ideas into viable businesses, offering opportunities to bankers and investors alike, only a trickle in. This can open markets and encourage entrepreneurs in Islamic lands where risk capital may not exist or be terribly scarce. The power of computers to search, identify, and classify people according to similar needs and tastes will create sustainable markets for many highly specialized products and services, an environment made to order for Islamic financial service providers. What's hot? Whether a specific service or the latest financial news or product will attract ever greater rewards. The costs of producing or promoting these commodities will not change. The potential market will increase dramatically. Of course, many more financial institutions and their customers will have access to timely and accurate information. That will curtail excessive profits, enhance competition, and reward efficient operations. It will be easier to find new clients and more difficult to make wide margins. While smaller institutions will find it possible to reach markets around the world, the giant financial conglomerates will more readily be able to offer high-quality local service. Culture and communication networks, rather than rigid management structures, will hold institutions together. Many will become networks of independent specialists, allowing for the clear segregation of RIBA and LARIBA activities. Loyalty, trust, and open communications will reshape the nature of client relationships. Another strong plus for LARIBA. On the one hand, the cost of starting new businesses will decline, and independent institutions can more easily buy into LARIBA services and may well result in more small, specialized, Islamic financial-oriented entities springing up. On the other hand, communication amplifies the strength of brands and the power of networks. In industries such as banking and finance, where networks really matter, concentration may increase, but often in the form of loose, national, or possibly even global associations under a banner of brand or quality guarantee. Again, the dream come true. The application and results of new technologies are still uncertain, but I'm convinced we stand at a hinge in history, and the ways in which we live and do business are going to be changing rapidly and permanently. All too often overlooked, however, is the potential for this technology to bring together those sharing common values and cultures, thus allowing and encouraging individuals to both actively participate in the global economy, while at the same time holding fast to their core values, traditions, and beliefs. What is America's place in this new world? Nations still compete with one another. They still have different interests. The terms of the competition have radically changed. During the first centuries of modern history, roughly from 1500 through 1900, power went to countries with large amounts of land and key natural resources such as iron ore, gold, or tin. They enlarged their power by simply taking over weaker nations or their territories and resources and adding to their own military power. Quite simply, a condition we've almost all encountered in our various national experiences, imperialism. But roughly a century ago, and again after a pause from the Great Depression and World War II, the terms of competition shifted from territory to trade. Between the 1950s and 1980s, the growth of trade easily outpaced the growth of national economies. With goods more mobile than capital or labor, key resources became state-of-the-art equipment and well-trained workers. Thus, for nations like Germany and Japan, able to gain large shares of global commerce and indirectly exert significant influence on world events. Power is shifting again, this time to nations whose people are more adept at summoning global financial capital and turning it into conceptual insights for sale around the world. The United States is the clear leader in this field. America's power exists because its wealth and influence depends on intangible flows of money and ideas. We live by the rule of equitable laws and transparent transactions. We do not require substantial exports to finance our imports and investment in plant and equipment. This country does, however, require a wealth of brains which to generate research, engineering concepts, marketing, legal and financial innovations, and information-based technology. The combination of native and immigrant intelligence honed at the great American centers of learning are providing that wealth and brain power in abundance. And Islamic communities are sharing an ever-increasing portion of that wealth and brain power. And I see this daily at Harvard University with the students that we have working in our information program, for the most part members of the Harvard Islamic Society. They are first-class young people by any standard anywhere in the world. It's brains operating in a free environment, not land, not arms, not natural resources or capital equipment, on which national wealth and power will depend in the future. Almost all nations are attempting to evolve in this direction, Some are becoming brain nations, specializing in ideas. And others are becoming what I call brawn nations, making tangible products on the basis of those ideas. The former category is led by the United States, followed by Western Europe and some of the nations of Southeast Asia. The latter category includes China, Eastern Europe, South Asia, and the African countries. Some brawny nations could transform themselves into brains, with enough emphasis on training their people's mind. But there's no room for doubters predicting a collision of cultures between the capitalist West and the fundamentalist East, or fretting about ethnic tribalism or a clash of civilizations. Professor Huntington at Harvard has written a very convincing book about the clash of civilizations, which vertically slices the world into cultural quarters. I don't believe that that is the problem that we're going to face. The problem we're going to face is a world cut horizontally between the haves and the have-nots. And that's something we all have to worry about wherever we sit, anywhere on the face of the earth. Education and job skills are the keys in determining wealth and influence. The nation must invest in its people, not worry about amassing expensive production capacity or armaments. In the final analysis, international competition will be a competition among educational systems. The same might be said for sectoral or intersector competition. Nations, like families, in effect choose their comparative advantage through the quality of schools and teachers they choose to support. Deciding to be an engineering center or engineer and not a biotechnology center or biologist will have little practical effect if too few citizens have a basic education to specialize. What about the individual? The active participants in this emerging system will, like corporations, be virtual citizens of the world. They'll be selling their services and investing their savings globally, wherever they can get the best return. But at the core of any nation are the bonds that unite a people, give them a sense of belonging to a common culture. By its very nature, some would say this new world of global connections generates few such bonds beyond mutual financial self-interest and strains the ones of inheritance and culture already in place. Our business school is finding a shift in career interests from corporations to corporate finance and consulting, to more individual entrepreneurial efforts such as information technology and just about anything.com. And the MBA students are even taking leave of absence so as not to miss their summer jobs, IPO. Education, divinity, even the law school are seeing applications open. Yet, I would dispute the judgment of not being true altogether, particularly in this country. America is a land of self-invention, where identity is less a birthright than a consumer choice. And on that matter of choice, the Islamic community is finely balanced between its inherent faith and modern American life. The United States offers unparalleled opportunities to take advantage of the coming together of three hallmarks of the global economy. Firstly, the clear dominance of free markets over what we used to call planned economies, and even more benignly directed economies in East and Southeast Asia. Secondly, the growing realization that risk can be actively managed rather than no more than passively endured through the utilization of innovative financial instruments and services. And thirdly, the developments in communications, information, and computational technology, which is quite new in practice. Its speed and detail not only allowed for round-the-clock trading, but also provided availability of customized information products beyond the dreams of only a few years ago. These points are tied together in creating an environment of an open market, where the existing hurdles between the types of financial products, institutions, markets, and states' regulations fall into the floor of very eyes. It's important, particularly important to make note that the rapidly expanding Islamic market and a general market that has already accepted the concept of ethical or socially responsible investing only accentuates and complements these structural attractions. In In this country, we recently witnessed legislation relaxing restrictions on interstate banking, financial conglomerates, and the lowering of earlier barriers affecting mergers and takeovers. The so-called Chinese wall that has separated commercial banking from investment banking and insurance is crumbling. On the other hand, regulatory requirements concerned with adequate capitalization and transparency of transactions and information disclosure are being tightened. Is all this setting the stage for a concentration of financial services in the hands of giant supermarkets such as HSBC, Citicorp, or the Deutsche Bank? These groups will certainly prosper, but so will smaller, more highly specialized institutions. The really crucial battles of our time will still be fought where they've always been fought, not in the deserts of the Middle East, or in the courts of European monarchs, or even through the flickering screens of the world financial markets, but in the hearts and minds of men and women everywhere. The future prospects for Islamic finance and banking in the United States exceed those of anywhere else on earth. Given the energy and imagination of seasoned practitioners, such as those present here today, can offer tremendous rewards. This sector should enjoy a secure and growing position, drawing upon the brain power that has been and continues to be attracted by the great opportunities which our legal, political, and commercial environment offers. I've long been fascinated by the strange asymmetry, however, between Christian and Islamic attitudes towards the acquisition and holding of wealth. This was the subject of a recent talk at the morning prayer service at Harvard, which is Harvard's oldest tradition. It was led by Professor Sam Hayes just a few weeks ago. A large portion of our Christian clergy, and some of their more narrow-minded followers, seem positively opposed to wealth. One suspects they take their lead from those virtually identical passages in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the New Testament, saying, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." Economic growth and personal wealth are almost always suspect, as sinful behavior unless proven otherwise. By this measure, precious few high net worth individuals will make it through the gates of paradise. Yet, the dominant American Christian ethic, processes of obtaining wealth are much less circumscribed. LARIBA is more flexibly defined, and hard work and savings are encouraged as aims in themselves. Virtues expounded by leading thinkers from Benjamin Franklin to Howard Greenspan. Islam, on the other hand, encourages and celebrates material success. It seems that through the Sharia has presented a thicket of restrictions along the path to achieving benefit. It seemed there might be considerable scope for some ideologically complementary cooperation within the open market regulatory framework, which is applicable to all players in the domestic financial community. For both of our great faiths certainly do agree, is on the responsibility of those who have wealth to help those in need, be it through charity for food and shelter for the victims of war or natural disaster, or the enlightened self-interest in support of education. And here I must say that our Harvard Islamic Finance Information Program remains active through the support of its loyal members. But if this program is to live up to its true potential, it must be expanded and made freely available to all. It should be established on a firmly endowed basis, perhaps by law, by the Islamic financial community, thus allowing its outreach to all the LARIBA institutions and beyond, to all those interested in the vision of the LARIBA. Markets, technology, and national environment exist, and I feel certain that through the judicious implementation of ethical and socially responsible practices, and investing consistent with Islamic practice, LARIBA, Islamic investment banking and finance, in the United States will thrive and prosper, driving camel caravans of successful, faithful, honest, and charitable men and women straight through the eyes of those scriptural people. Thank you.
Allow me to present our last speaker, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Professor Mahmoud Al-Ghamid. He's a professor of economics and statistics at Rice University and professor of Islamic economics and finance and management at the same university.
Professor Moore, first of all, for using Shakespearean code from King Lear. So I'm using the one from Hamlet here. But I'm going to add a little non-Shakespearean part to it. But I also want to thank Professor Moore. I'm ad-libbing here, since I'm already done, by the way. I was done 7 minutes ago, so I might as well ad-lib. I want to also thank him for basically summarizing through his talk some of the main points that people think about when they think about Islamic finance. And let me enumerate a few that I caught as he was speaking. One, that Islam prohibits interest, basically everybody's interest. The second is that interest is immoral. Third, money does not reproduce. Fourth, that the prohibition of riba is because Islam insists that there should be no profit without risk. There were a few others, but those are the main ones that come to everybody's mind. And what I hope to convince you in this talk is that all of these stereotypical views are practically false. That that's not what Islamic jurisprudence says, that's not what's forbidden. And in fact, I think that this, those stereotypical views, which were started by al-Maududi and repeated since then, which are all completely wrong from a jurisprudence point of view, as well as an economic point of view, not only are they wrong in principle, but they also undermine the institutions of Islamic finance, because in practice, it would hurt them if the argument were to be made that interest is forbidden. So let me show you, so what is exactly the forbidden riba? So there are 4 types of riba. If you look in your favorite madhab or whatever juristic school you subscribe to, you'll find variations on the names, but basically there are 2 types of riba that involve interest. There's riba jahiliyyah, which basically in pre-Islamic Arabia, people would extend interest-free loans, and when the person was not able to pay, they would charge an interest for deferment of payment. And this was called al-dhulmi asad. Say, give me more time, I give you more money. And everybody agrees that that is what was meant, or at least part of what was meant in the verses of riba, so beautifully recited by the Shaykh at the beginning. Another one, which the vast majority of the jurists agree was also meant in those verses, is riba nasi'ah, which is an increase with time that distributed at the beginning of the loan. So it wasn't an interest-free loan and then you tacked on interest when the person wasn't able to pay, but from the very beginning you told him, you want a year, you have to pay me 10%, you want 2 years, you have to pay me 20%. But then there are 2 other types of riba that do not involve interest. Riba nasa is deferment even without increase. So if I sell you a pound of gold today for a deferred price of a pound of gold to be paid in a year, or I pay a pound of gold now as a price for a deferred delivery of the goods that are a pound of gold in a year. So because gold for gold, either one can be defined as a price, either one can be defined as the output of the same, that is still forbidden. It's a pound for a pound. It is still forbidden. It's not a question of interest. Deferment, the hadith that is listed below here, basically specifies the archetypal ribawi goods, as they are called, or goods that are eligible for riba. There are 6 of them, and then the juries differ over how you generalize from there, and we don't need to get into that. But basically, let's take gold. There are 2 conditions. It has to be hand-to-hand and in equal amounts. So if there's deferment, some of the Shafi'is would call it riba niyat, others would call it riba nasa. And nasi and nasa traditionally in classical Arabic mean the same thing. They mean deferment. But the modern Shafi'is in Al-Azhar basically make a distinction between one with interest and one without. So there are 4 types of riba generally: 2 with interest, 2 without. Okay. So when you look at any translation you like of the Quran, including Yusuf Hadi, which was read very eloquently in the beginning, you'll see the words either interest or usury. But riba is neither interest nor usury, and let me tell you why. So, as we've seen, not all, well, later I'll show you what riba is, but this is a different point. Not all interest is forbidden riba. For instance, in the types of contracts that define Islamic institutions using an ijara, or just a lease, or a murabaha, it's a cost plus sale, usually with deferred payment of the price, maybe in installments, there is interest. And I'll show you later, if we use the definition of the English, I'll show you the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of interest. There is interest, but it's not forbidden interest. And as a matter of fact, the classical jurists, if you read the exegesis of Tubi, you'll find the nations of Allah saying, riba ribawani halal wa haram. There are two types of riba, one forbidden, one not forbidden. Riba literally just means increase. But if you just say riba without qualifying which one, we usually mean the forbidden type of riba, the type of increase. That's another point about that money doesn't grow by itself. That's a point I'm going to make later. We've already seen there are types of riba that are without interest. So there's interest without riba, there is riba without interest. Therefore, that's a very good translation. The other thing is, well, can we use the term usury? It's closer, and Yusufat uses the term usury, but typically, as you see again from the usual dictionary definitions, when we use the term usury, we usually mean exorbitant interest. And what is forbidden, we said even 0% would be considered. By the way, the jurists go into great detail why it is that the riba itself, which is deferment without interest, is forbidden, and you'll see that has implications for other things. So this is, if you just go to the Merriam-Webster website and you pull up interest, you'll see here I enlarged this point. There is the 2A, which is what most people think when they use that term, to charge for money. The other one is just the profit made on invested capital. That's one of the reasons that people have to sort of reach over backwards in order to try to explain what is the difference between what people do in an Islamic bank, where they do a cost plus sale, where there's a profit of 10% over a year, versus a loan to buy the same good with 10% interest. If you define one as interest, it's idle sophistry not to say, and then we have this very nice statement about the ethical aspects and so on, but banks can be ethical or non-ethical. That has nothing to do with whether or not they use riba. I think saying Islam forbids interest in this sense is just false. The other thing is, well, usury does say yes, a loan with interest is usury, but you see especially if planned at exorbitant rates, and the other one is obviously unconscionably exorbitant. So. I would suggest just, I like the term LARIBA for that reason. It says no riba, it doesn't say no interest. I think it's appropriate since in Islamic finance we're very fond of using Arabic terms for which there are good English translations, like saying ijara instead of lease, or ijara of dinar instead of saying lease purchase, and so on, saying murabaha instead of saying qasbaz. We might as well use the one word that doesn't have a translation, that is riba. Okay. So again, I keep making this point over and over again. The Yusufati translation, again, based on that false interpretation of why riba is forbidden, and I'll show you what the jurists say about this, stops right here. So the verse says, فَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. It's one verse, no stopping. Even the recitation usually don't stop. But his translation actually stops with a full stop. It says, well, not full stop, but a semicolon, and then it says, give not unjustly, and we shall not be unjustly. You read any good exegesis, like Lawari, for instance, and you say, well, means don't pay more and don't pay less. So, if you repent, you get back your principal without any increase or reduction. That's what the verse says. Okay? And here is why the prohibition of riba is not about kindness or prevention of exploitation. There was actually a reported, if you read Al-Majmu'ah by Nawawi al-Majmu'ah, which I have by Nawawi in the continuation by Ibn Suki, you'll see it says, well, people say that riba is forbidden because there's exploitation in it. Well, of course the exploitation is forbidden, But riba is about a lot of other things. It could be by mutual consent. It could be mutually beneficial. It is still forbidden, or at least apparently mutually beneficial. We have to dig deeper for why economically it's not. So what Craig Yusufi, actually, this is volume 9, which is already interactive now, is that he says, well, Kaysan said that provision of riba is that it's unfair for somebody to pay $100 and then get back 110. For somebody to get 100 and then have to pay 110. That's unfair. But then he says, well, this is silly, because there are, even though, as we've seen, the hadith lists 6 goods that are ribawi, that are eligible for riba, and then the different schools, the Hanafis, go to everything that's measurable by weight of volume, the Shafi'is and Malikis and Hanbalis go to foodstuffs, storable foodstuffs, the Maliki and Shafi'i, and monetary numerators, gold and silver, and so on. Everybody agrees that there are certain goods that are not ribawi. For instance, cows. So Ibn Sufi says, well, how about this? Islam perfectly permits lending or selling 100 cows now for 200 cows in a year. Same genus, different number. Okay, no problem. Pound of gold for 2 pounds of gold forbidden. 1 cow for 2 cows, perfectly permitted. So whatever logic you have about the rate of return on it being unfair, etc., it's just wrong. That's not what's being forbidden. Okay? Now the consequences of this faulty explanation have taken people to both extremes. So some of them extended to some permitted trades. They would say about the trading 1 cow for 2 cows that it's forbidden. And indeed, and now we also list some of the people who made that argument that said that that's wrong. You know, I mean, there's no way you can say that in Islam certain profit trades are not permitted. They are permitted as long as you don't violate what is clearly forbidden. And at the other extreme, we have the Egyptian school starting with Sanhuri and then Shabtut and then Tantawi and all the ulama of Azhar, who basically decided that, well, the interest as it exists now is not exploitative and therefore shouldn't be forbidden. That's not what riba is. It's an investment. When you buy government bonds, you're basically implicitly investing in the public sector, and you get to share in the profit. The fact that it's fixed is not a problem, and so they've actually allowed that. So who went as far as to say that interest on capital is not forbidden, but interest on persons and so on. So that's again going to that issue because of that faulty explanation. This is sort of like saying that the prohibition of pork was because of the tinea worms that were in it. Now that we know how to cure pork, we should eat it. It was a faulty explanation to start with, and by the removal of that faulty explanation, you don't remove the prohibition. Now, return without risk. That's another false statement. There's always credit risk. Okay, when a bank lends somebody, there's always the chance the person will not pay back and will not have any assets to be seized. Throwing in jail doesn't do you any good. So there's always credit risk. It's just one type of risk versus another. And indeed, when you do a murabha or a lease, you're still exposed to the credit risk, and it's the only form of risk that you're exposed to. It may be mitigated by the fact that there's a physical asset you can seize, and we'll talk about that a little bit. That's what's really going on in finance. Okay, but when you lend somebody money and saying, well, I'm guaranteed 10%, no, you're not guaranteed. The person may default from the loan. Okay, and this is and then there's another thing that people tend to cite for this, that there's no return without risk. It's allowed in Islam. They cite Kharaj al-Daman. You hear it everywhere, even some eminent Islamic economists there. So you go to the CD-ROM of Mawsu'at al-Hadith and search Kharaj al-Daman in all 9 major books of Hadith. And you get 5 narrations of that Hadith. Only one of them actually says that Rasulullah said Kharaj al-Daman. Okay. The other 4 list it with a little bit different. It says Kharaj al-Abdi bil-Damani. And they all list the story about it. It's narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha. And the story is that 2 men went to the Prophet ﷺ to judge between them. One of them had sold the slave to the other one. It's back when slavery wasn't abolished. As we know, Islam abolished it gradually instead of causing a big economic trauma. It put all these different penalties, all of which involve freeing slaves, and you could enslave others, so eventually it went out gradually and painlessly. But at that time, it was still there, and so one person sold the slave to the other. After a month, that other person said, well, this slave is sick, he's not very productive, and wanted to use the option. Also, Islam had the inspection option, and wanted to exercise his option to return the slave because he didn't tell him he was sick. And he wanted his price back in total. And the other person said, but you've used him for a month. You've used his labor for a month, and therefore I shouldn't pay you the full price. I'm willing to admit that, yes, I forgot to pay you a mistake, but I'll pay you less. And so they went to the Prophet ﷺ, arbitrate. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you pay the price in full. And he said, how come? For a month he's been using his labor services. And that's what Rasulullah ﷺ said, he said, well, the income that the slave was producing, his haraj, goes to the person who is responsible for him. So if he had died during that month, he would die in the property of the current owner, the buyer. And that's what it's about. It's not about profit and risk. Everything involves risk. As we all know, anybody who's had a first course in economics and finance knows that there's no financial transaction that's void of risk, including lending, with interest. There's credit risk. It's a question of what types of risks and how do you manage them. Okay, so that's the citation everybody uses, and it's just completely out of context. And they use the weakest, the strongest of the narrations is the one in Muslim Imam Ahmad, and it has the Kharaj al-Aql as well as they all have the full story. So this is just a few cases of quoting out of context. Time value of money. We hear a lot. That was one of the things. Money doesn't reproduce. As a matter of fact, it's not an Islamic doctrine. It is a doctrine of the Catholic Church that money is not fertile. Money does not reproduce. But when we talk about the ribawi goods that are eligible for riba means increase. Zakah also means increase. Zakah is the Islamic tax that is paid. It's sort of a welfare tax system. Zakah is only levied on goods that are eligible for growth. Because zakah comes from zakah. Zakah means to grow. Riba comes from raba, which means to grow as well. And that is why the comparison in Surah Al-Rum, وما آتيتم من ربا ليربو في أموال الناس فلا يربو عند الله وما آتيتم من زكاة تريدون وجه الله فأولئك هم المضعفون. It compares two things that grow. Riba that grows in the money of other people, that doesn't grow. But zakah, which grows to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the true multiplication. So the comparison, and that's why, by the way, for those of you who are familiar with the Quran, you read, always the verses of riba will be associated before, in the middle, and after by verses of zakat. There's always that comparison, seeking increase in property and seeking increase by giving it away for charity. Does Islam negate the time value of money? Absolutely not. Just a few quotations. I know I showed them last year, but you comb through books of jurisprudence, and there are tons and tons of quotations about how there is time value of money. As a matter of fact, As-Sarakhsi, when he discusses why riba, where there is deferment but no increase, no interest in our terminology, is still forbidden, he said, because nobody will ever give away the usage, the time value of the money for that period, unless he's getting something else in return. Whatever that something else is, it's riba, and therefore the whole thing should be forbidden. Okay? A loan is something else. I'll tell you later. So that will take us back to neither a borrower nor lender be, unless it's in charity. But basically, so books of jurisprudence are full of admissions that there is time value of money. To get back to the zakah and riba, if it's not, if it doesn't increase, if you think that money doesn't increase by itself when you invest property, obviously not when it's hoarded under a mattress, when you invest property it increases, and that's why it is eligible for zakah. If it weren't eligible for riba, it wouldn't be eligible for zakah. It's very simple. They both come from the same term. What is eligible for riba is eligible for zakah, what is not. Now, so what's the loan about? Now, when we talk about debts, when you see what the jurists talk about, they will talk about riba al-duyun and riba al-duyun. And dayn, or debt, may originate from a sale. If you have a sale with a deferred payment, then the payment is a debt on the seller. Deferred price, then it's on the debt on the buyer. And if it's a salam, that's the Islamic forward, where the price is paid in full, and then the goods are to be delivered later with deferment, then those goods, and they have to be ribawi goods, because they have to be fungible, will have to be, will become a debt on the seller. But also debts may originate from loans, and that's what the distinction is. In the first time, this debt may include part of it as the time value. So everybody agrees that if you sell this podium here, you may sell it cash and carry for $100, but if you're going to pay me over 5 years, the total payments will maybe be $120. Okay, and that's perfectly permitted. Everybody agrees to it. I mean, that's the basis on which Islamic banking is possible. But it's tied to a physical asset, and therefore the rate of return will be tied to the depreciation of the asset, the ability to recover the asset if the person defaults, etc. Loans, on the other hand, are charitable contracts. So when you look in any books of jurisprudence, a loan would be, is a charity. What you're doing is you're giving away the use of the money or the property that you're lending for that period. You lend a car to a friend, he drives it around for a week, you're giving him the usage of the car for that period. You give somebody $100, you collect back $100, and the usage, the time value, is charity that you give it away. And when you look, you find that there are lots of narrations, for instance, about Abdullah ibn Abbas where he says, I would rather lend a dinar and have it returned to me and lend it again than just give it away in charity. Because this way he can help lots of different people by giving them Dr. Hassan. It is not a mode of finance. It is a charitable contract. If we actually think of it as something that we can use in finance, and there are some of the early writers in Islamic banking who said that you can build Islamic finance on interest-free loans, doesn't work. If it becomes a sales contract, if it's a contract where it's binding, remember, in a loan, if the person cannot pay, then you have to forgive them. That's the whole point. You wait until he can, and if he can't, then you just keep postponing and you just write it all off. It's for seeking Allah. It's not for getting the money back anyway. So if it goes away, it goes away. It doesn't matter. But if you make it binding, and by the way, for a loan, you can always go to the person and say, at any point, I want my money back. If you make it the type of loan you get from a bank, he can't come and ask you for it until the loan has matured. So if you make it like that, then it's a sales contract. It's a sale of money now for money later that has to be delivered. Just like in a sale with deferred payment, you can specify when he has to pay back. If you do that, then it becomes riba and asset, whether or not there is interest. So it is forbidden anyway. Of course, the rate of return on the top is unknown, since we're not allowed to return. Okay, so can borrowing then be actually harmful? I mean, why would it be forbidden? This is a general principle of Islamic jurisprudence. Nothing is forbidden that is good for you, and nothing is permitted that is bad for you. Within, obviously, you may have abuse of the system, but as a general rule, it cannot be generally good or generally bad. So why would you have this? Okay, so ask yourself. Last year I talked a little bit about a more macro economic view, and maybe that didn't go very well about why market to market is good for economic efficiency and so on. But let's think individually. Okay, if you're a person who's thinking of going to a bank to borrow, you're thinking of the person thinking of using a credit card. Not just as a facilitation, but actually using the credit card for what it was meant to be used for, which is not paying and being charged utilities. Ask yourself, are you a person who, if I tell you, would you rather have $100 today or 101 tomorrow, you say, I'll take the 100. But if I ask you, would you rather have 101 in 51 days or 150 days? To you, it seems that 50 days and 51 days are pretty much the same thing, and you say, I'll take the 101, that sounds like $1 more. Okay? Think, are you one of those people or not? Would you rather have $9 today than $12 in a year? And would you prefer $4,000 in a year to $3,000 today? Now, what I'm choosing here are not arbitrary things. So those are things where about 90% of subjects in economic and psychology experiments tend to do that. Okay? Say 9 today or 12 in a year, hey, I wait a year just to get $3 more doesn't seem worth it. Say 3,000 today or 4,000 a year, and all of a sudden it's $1,000. Now the interest rate is exactly the same. Okay? Do you discount losses more than gains? That's a little bit harder to phrase, but think about it. If I tell you that you're going to have an accident in a year, you sort of not think about it as much as if I told you that you're going to get a new car in a year. And do you discount delays more than you discount speed-ups? So when I tell you, well, you're going to have the accident in a year, now you're going to have it tomorrow, you all of a sudden panic more than if I told you, guess what, the car instead of getting it in a year, you're going to get it tomorrow. You sort of say, well. Now, most people actually satisfy this thing, and if you said yes to any of them, guess what? You're dynamically inconsistent. So let me tell you, this is a bad word for economists. So just in case you don't know what it means to be dynamically inconsistent, let me tell you. So most people are. And this is something I really feel very much for it, so I think many of you probably. So let's say you know that the steak is bad for you, and the salad is good for you. And you have a choice. You could go to a steakhouse which serves really great steaks, as well as very healthy salads. Or going to a place that only serves the salads. Okay? What would you do? Now, if you know you're dynamically consistent, you say, I'm not going to go to the steakhouse because I know once I'm sitting there and I see that thing on the menu, I'm not going to be able to find temptation. Right? But and this is, I know this is tongue-in-cheek, but notice the language of the Quran also about lots of other things. لا تقربوا الزنا. Right? إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه. It's not just avoid it, be far away from it. Because once you get very close to it, you're going to be dynamically inconsistent, saying, well, I can get there and not do it. But once you're there, so how can you make sure that if you go to the steakhouse, you're actually not going to go to the steak, you quote-unquote pre-commit? Because that's a good word in economics. Now, pre-commitment basically says, I take my wife with me. And she'll make sure I'm not going to eat that steak. Or, if my wife is in Egypt, they always do that, then I just go to a salad place. Now, I'm not going to say one of us, but do you know anybody who sort of fits that example of dynamic inconsistency, but he does it this way? He borrows today, says, look, I'm a student. You know, what harm can it do? I'll borrow now, and as soon as I get a job, I'm going to really, really restrict my expenditures and save a lot and pay off my loans right away. Right? But then, as soon as next year comes around, he has a new job, he's got to get a new car. So I think a car loan, I've got to get this nice stereo, so I'm not going to save. And all of a sudden, he's actually borrowing more than he had borrowed before. So a year after getting his first job, he's deeper in debt. Then the following year, he gets married and says, oh, I've got to buy a house. And he's getting deeper and deeper in debt all the time. You may know people like that, I do. The solution, again, is pre-commitment. So in Islamic finance, you don't get debts just because you're creditworthy. And creditworthy here could be that your debt is rich, so we know eventually somebody's going to pay off. If you're getting deeper and deeper in debt, it's economically completely unsound. What you're going to do in Islamic finance is you're actually going to tie the debt to an asset. The debt comes from the sale of an asset with the price being paid over a period. Now, it's perfectly permissible to have the price that is paid over time include the time value of money, and yes, the ugly word, interest. We made it ugly for some reason. It was just poor translation. Really bad translation. So, yes, you're allowed to charge interest in the lease, you're allowed to charge interest, and call it something else if you want, call it the profit margin, call it the fee, but basically you're allowed to charge a higher price. Fine, but it's tied to an asset. And the schedule of payments is made so that you're going to be able to seize the asset if you're the bank if the person is not paying off. And the person, if the person is abiding by some clause, he's not going to be able to go and run off his credit bill, his credit card bills. You're basically going to know exactly what are the assets that he has and what are the debts that he owes tied to this asset. This is pre-commitment. Your creditors then will ensure that you don't get too badly into debt. They're not worried about that your dad will be able to pay. Well, who knows what your dad is doing with the money. They actually want to make sure that the assets that you're holding are enough collateral for what you owe them. Simple as that. Now, credit card issuers, on the other hand, want the exactly opposite type of guys. I could never get credit card companies to increase my credit limit. Like when I'm moving from one place to another, I need to make a lot of arrangements for tickets and moving companies and so on. They hate me. I pay my bills every month. If I were paying them interest, they'd love it. They'd be jacking up my credit limit over and over again. That's what all my friends said. As soon as you bump up against the limit, that's when they want you, right? Because that's where they make the money. 5% from the merchant, that's peanuts. Where they really make the money is the 20%. Okay, so Islamic finance companies, they want you to buy solid physical assets that they know the depreciation rate of, and they make sure that what you owe is less than the value of the asset. So in essence, you could always just go and sell the asset, pay off your debt, and you're clear. You're always clear. Okay. So I did this last year, and I ended my own. So, but basically, there's market to market that I discussed then, and there's also the banks that can get to market that instead of having an interest rate, it's just basically LIBOR, what banks lend, the rate at which banks lend to each other plus something. What you do is you define the rate of return by marking it to the market value of that object. So if the object depreciates too fast, you have to have a higher rate of return on your money to compensate for that. So that you make sure that the person's current remaining debt is enough to can be covered by the asset. Or if it's a risky area, then you have to have risk premium and so on. That's perfectly dependent again. And then, as we said, that's form of pre-commitment. So the conclusion is that the differences are really subtle. And that is why the verses, again, so beautifully recited in the beginning, say about how the people in Arabia, the non-Muslims obviously, were just going mad. They're saying, LARIBA, trading is exactly like usury. It's the same thing, isn't it? 10%, 10%. What's the difference?